You really think you can treat me like this? Jason Miller muttered, watching Rachel Harris scrub his car. The sun beat down on the driveway as the sleek black sports car gleamed under her hands. He leaned back against his own car, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. I bet you don't even know what you're doing here. Rachel didn't flinch. She just kept working, the sound of the sponge against the surface of the car echoing softly in the quiet afternoon. She'd heard it all before. The condescension, the jokes, the assumption that she didn't belong. But today, things were different. Jason continued to sneer, clearly proud of himself. You know, they say people like you shouldn't be here. You got your place, right? He grinned, his voice dripping with contempt. Rachel's movements were calm, controlled. She wasn't here to argue. She wasn't here to fight. But she wasn't going to let his ignorance slide either. I'm just doing my job, she said, her voice steady, her gaze never leaving the car she was cleaning. Jason scoffed. Yeah, your job. Well, we both know people like you don't get to have real jobs. Stick to what you know, sweetheart. His words stung, but Rachel didn't react. She focused on the task at hand. In the quiet of the moment, Jason's confidence grew. He leaned in, taking another shot at her. Don't you think you should be doing something? More your speed? He chuckled. Rachel paused, her hand still on the sponge, but she didn't say anything. She simply looked up at him. Her eyes locked onto his. For a brief second, Jason saw something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was just calm. It was the kind of calm that made him hesitate for the first time. Rachel stood straight, placing the sponge down slowly. She took a deep breath, adjusting her uniform. Jason watched her, the smugness never leaving his face. He was about to say something else, but she spoke first. You really think you know who you're talking to? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. Jason's grin faded slightly. Something in her tone made him uneasy, but he brushed it off. What's that supposed to mean? He scoffed. Rachel didn't answer him right away. Instead, she reached up and pulled off her sunglasses, revealing a small badge on her belt. Her hand slid the sunglasses into her pocket as she took a step closer to him. You've been disrespecting me for the last 10 minutes, Jason, she said calmly, her eyes never leaving his. Jason blinked, a wave of confusion washing over him. You don't know who I am, do you? Rachel added. The words hit him harder than he expected. Jason's mouth went dry as the realization started to dawn on him. The woman he'd been mocking for the last 10 minutes? She wasn't just some random worker. She wasn't just someone he could dismiss. She wasn't just cleaning cars. She was his commanding officer. I'm not just a cleaner, Rachel continued, her voice unwavering. I'm the one who's been overseeing your department. And you've been disrespecting me. Jason's eyes widened in shock, his face flushed with embarrassment. He tried to speak, but the words got stuck in his throat. I didn't know. Rachel shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Of course you didn't. But now you do. Jason stood there, frozen, his mind racing as the weight of the situation set in. The power dynamic had just flipped. Karma was coming for him, and there was nothing he could do about it. Jason stood there, his mouth open, trying to process what had just happened. He had thought Rachel was just another person doing a mundane job, but the badge on her belt told him everything. His heart raced as he tried to piece together the reality that had just shattered his arrogant facade. He had spent the last 10 minutes mocking her, assuming she was beneath him, unaware that the woman he'd belittled was his superior. The silence between them felt heavy. Rachel didn't flinch, didn't blink. She simply stood there, waiting. Jason's eyes darted between her and the badge, his mind scrambling for an excuse, some way to explain his actions. But there was nothing. I didn't mean, he began, his voice trailing off as his words failed him. Rachel tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. You didn't mean what? To humiliate me? To make assumptions about my worth based on what I look like? She asked the question slowly, each word cutting through the air with a calm precision that made Jason feel smaller with every passing second. Jason opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. He had no idea how to fix this. Rachel's stance was calm, almost too calm, as if she had already known this moment was coming. Jason shifted on his feet, suddenly feeling very aware of his position. She wasn't just a random person. She wasn't someone he could push around. She was someone with power, someone who had earned the right to be where she was, and now, His own actions had exposed him for the hypocrite he was. "I don't expect you to understand, Jason," Rachel continued, her voice soft but firm. "But I do expect you to respect me. Not because of what I wear or what I do, but because I'm a person who deserves that respect, just like anyone else. And you crossed a line today." Jason's face turned red, his eyes cast downward. He had never felt so small. All the bravado he had been carrying around for so long seemed to evaporate in an instant, leaving him feeling exposed, vulnerable. Rachel took a step back, her eyes never leaving his. "It's not about me getting revenge. It's about you learning a lesson in humility. You think you can look down on people like me, but you have no idea what it's like to work your way up from nothing." Jason shifted uncomfortably, the weight of her words pressing down on him. His thoughts raced, but no matter how much he wanted to apologize, he knew it wouldn't be enough to undo the damage he had caused. "I'm sorry," he muttered, but the words felt empty. Rachel didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned, her movements deliberate and controlled. As she walked toward the door, she stopped for a moment, glancing over her shoulder. "You may have power here, Jason. But remember, there's always someone with more. And next time, be careful who you decide to disrespect." With that, she left, leaving Jason standing there, rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the weight of his own shame. The sound of her footsteps faded, but the impact of her words lingered. He knew one thing for sure. He would never look at people the same way again. Jason stood in the driveway for what felt like an eternity, his mind replaying every single word he had said to Rachel. The harsh words, the dismissive tone, the sneers. He had humiliated her, not knowing who she really was. But now, as he stood there alone, he realized how wrong he had been. He had let his own biases cloud his judgment, and now, the weight of that realization hit him like a ton of bricks. His pulse quickened as he looked down at his hands, still trembling from the encounter. He had been the one in control just moments ago, but now? Now, he felt powerless. Rachel's words echoed in his mind. There's always someone with more power. He had thought he was untouchable. He had thought his badge gave him the right to treat people however he wanted. But now he knew better. Rachel had shown him that power wasn't just about a badge or a title. It was about respect, about knowing who you were and not allowing anyone to diminish your worth. And in that moment, Jason understood. His pride had been shattered, and with it, his understanding of what true authority meant. He looked down the street, still unable to move. His car was still parked in front of him, but it didn't feel like his anymore. Everything around him seemed to lose its meaning. Rachel had walked away with her dignity intact, while he was left with nothing but a bruised ego and a lesson learned the hard way. Jason knew he had to do something. He couldn't just let this moment slip away. But what could he do? How could he make up for what he had done? He started walking slowly, his mind racing as he replayed everything. He didn't know where he was going, but he couldn't stand still. He had to fix this, even if it was too late. As he walked down the street, he saw Rachel again, just a few houses down, walking with the same calm demeanor he had seen earlier. She wasn't looking back. She didn't need to. Jason's heart sank. He couldn't just let her go like that. He couldn't let her walk away thinking he was the same person who had disrespected her. He quickened his pace, his feet pounding against the pavement, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the neighborhood. He reached her just as she was about to turn the corner. "Rachel," he called out, his voice sounding different now. She stopped and turned, her expression unreadable. Jason took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I'm sorry," he said, his voice faltering. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you like that." Rachel didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, her gaze steady, waiting. Jason swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her silence. "I get it now. I understand what you were trying to tell me," he said, his voice quieter this time. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I see it now. I was wrong." Rachel's eyes softened for a moment, but she didn't say anything. She simply nodded once, as if acknowledging his apology. And with that, she turned and continued walking down the street, leaving Jason standing there, a little wiser, a little humbler. The road ahead wouldn't be easy for him, but Jason knew one thing for sure. He would never take people for granted again. Jason sat in his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind still replaying the moment he had apologized to Rachel. Her calm, steady response had both relieved and unsettled him. She hadn't demanded anything from him. No grand gesture, no public apology. She simply nodded, as though she already knew he would come to this realization. The car's engine hummed, a steady reminder that time was passing, but Jason didn't move. He sat there, reflecting on what had just happened, on how he had treated Rachel, and on the harsh lesson he had learned. He knew he couldn't just let this go. He couldn't let himself forget the gravity of the situation. He had been arrogant, dismissive, and ignorant. He had disrespected someone who had far more power than he had realized, someone who deserved his respect, not his scorn. Jason had always prided himself on his career, his badge, his position. But in that moment, Rachel had shown him that true power wasn't about titles or authority. It was about how you treated others. It was about dignity, respect, and the courage to stand up for yourself and others. He thought back to Rachel's words. There's always someone with more power. And for the first time, he understood what she meant. Power wasn't something you could wield carelessly. It was something that came with responsibility, something that had to be earned, something that couldn't be used to demean or belittle others. He exhaled slowly, his fingers still tight on the wheel. Jason knew he had to do more than just apologize. He had to change. He had to prove that he understood what he had done wrong. But where to begin? The thought of facing his colleagues, his peers, knowing that they would likely hear about his behavior, made him feel uneasy. He had to own up to it, to show them that he had learned something important. But the thought of confronting his own failures terrified him. He glanced at his phone on the passenger seat. He had a message from his supervisor, a simple one. "We need to talk." Jason's stomach turned. He knew exactly what it was about. His actions, his behavior toward Rachel, would come up, and he would have to face the consequences. But for the first time, he wasn't trying to avoid them. He wasn't looking for a way out. He was ready to face what he had done and make things right. Jason took a deep breath, his eyes focusing on the road ahead. The conversation with his supervisor was inevitable. It would be uncomfortable, but he knew it was necessary. He had to be honest. He had to be accountable. He couldn't continue to hide behind his badge, pretending that his actions didn't matter. As he drove to the station, he thought about Rachel again. He had no idea what she was doing right now, but he hoped she was at peace. He hoped she was moving on with her day, not burdened by the interaction they had shared. As for him, the road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jason felt ready to face it, ready to learn, and maybe, just maybe, he would become the person he always should have been. He pulled into the station parking lot, his car slowing to a stop. Jason didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He would never take people for granted again. Jason walked into the station, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the conversation ahead, but this time, he wasn't trying to avoid it. He knew he had to face the consequences of his actions, and as uncomfortable as it was, he was ready. His supervisor, Officer Thomas, was already sitting at his desk when Jason entered the room. Thomas looked up, his expression neutral. "Jason, take a seat," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. Jason nodded and sat down, his hands resting on his lap, his fingers tapping nervously. There was a long silence between them before Thomas spoke again. "I've heard what happened," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And I need to know where your head is at right now." Jason took a deep breath, his gaze steady as he met his supervisor's eyes. "I messed up," he said, his voice low. "I acted without thinking. I disrespected someone, and I know I need to make it right." Thomas nodded, not speaking right away. He just watched Jason, studying him. Jason felt the tension in the room, but he didn't back down. "I don't expect anyone to just let this slide," he continued. "I know I have to own up to what I did, and I'm ready to take responsibility for it. I've learned that there's more to being a cop than just wearing the badge. There's more to having power than using it to get your way." Thomas leaned back in his chair, still silent, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Jason continued, his words coming faster now, as if he couldn't stop himself. "I've been so focused on my own authority, on what I thought I deserved, that I didn't even realize I was treating people like they didn't matter. But Rachel," he paused, the memory of Rachel's calm face, her unshaken resolve, coming back to him. "Rachel showed me that respect isn't something you can demand just because you have a badge. It's something you earn every day, and I didn't earn hers. Not by a long shot." The silence stretched again, but it was different this time. It wasn't heavy with judgment. It felt like a moment of reflection, like both of them were thinking about what was being said. After a beat, Thomas spoke. "You've got guts, Jason," he said, his tone softer now. "Most people in your position would have tried to cover it up, pretend it didn't happen. But you're owning it. That's the first step." Jason nodded, relieved, but still anxious. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted. "But I'm ready for whatever comes. I don't want to be the guy who takes his power for granted anymore. I want to do better. I want to be someone people can actually respect." Thomas gave a small, approving nod. "Good. That's all I can ask for." Jason felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but it wasn't over. He knew he had to show everyone, including himself, that he could change. This was just the beginning. "We're not done here, Jason," Thomas said, breaking the silence. "But this is a good start. Just keep your head on straight, and don't let your pride get the best of you again." Jason stood up, the tension in his body easing. "I won't," he said, his voice firm. "I won't make the same mistake again." As he left Thomas's office, Jason felt something different. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was more like a new sense of purpose, a recognition that he had a long road ahead. But at least he was on the right path now. He had learned a painful lesson, but it was one that would shape him for the better. And as he walked out of the station, he knew he had a lot of work to do to rebuild the trust he had broken. But he was ready to put in the effort. For the first time in a long time, Jason felt like he was truly ready to be the man he was supposed to be. Jason woke up the next morning with a sense of resolve that he hadn't felt in a long time. He had spent the entire night replaying his conversation with Officer Thomas, thinking about what he had learned and what he still needed to do. The world outside his window was the same, but Jason knew that he had changed. He dressed quickly, pulling on his uniform, but something about it felt different now. He was wearing it with a new purpose, a new understanding. He wasn't just wearing a badge for the power it gave him. He was wearing it to show respect, to honor the responsibility that came with the role. As he left his apartment, the sun was just beginning to rise. The streets were quieter at this hour, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and distant car engines. Jason found himself walking with a new sense of purpose, his head held high, his shoulders relaxed. It wasn't about the badge or the uniform. It was about how he carried himself, about how he treated others. He walked into the precinct, his boots making soft echoes on the floor as he approached his desk. His colleagues were already busy with their morning routines, but Jason didn't feel out of place anymore. He felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. As he sat down at his desk, he noticed the familiar faces around him, but this time, they didn't seem so distant. They were people, people he had judged, people he had overlooked. Now, he saw them differently. He was ready to start building the trust that he had lost, one small step at a time. As the day went on, Jason found himself facing challenges he hadn't anticipated. Calls came in, paperwork piled up, and the usual chaos of the precinct unfolded around him. But this time, he wasn't overwhelmed. He was calm. He took his time with each task, giving his full attention to every detail. And when he interacted with the other officers, he made sure to listen, to really listen. He didn't let his position cloud his judgment anymore. He asked questions, showed genuine interest, and treated everyone with the respect they deserved. By the time his shift ended, Jason felt a quiet sense of pride. It wasn't about how much he had done. It was about how he had done it. He had started making amends, not by big gestures, but by small, deliberate actions. As he drove home that evening, the sun setting in the distance, he thought about Rachel. He wondered if she was doing okay, if she had moved on from their brief but intense encounter. He hadn't expected her to forgive him, and he wasn't looking for that. He just hoped she knew that he had learned something that day, something that would stick with him for the rest of his career. Jason pulled into his driveway and sat there for a moment, the engine of his car still running. He knew that this was just the beginning. He still had a long way to go to fully earn back the respect he had lost. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to do the work. He turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and walked into his house. The night felt quieter, the weight of the past day's lessons settling into him like a second skin. Jason knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was no longer afraid. He was ready to face them with a new mindset, with humility, and with the knowledge that respect is something you give, not something you demand. The next few weeks felt like a blur to Jason, a constant cycle of reflection, learning, and small but meaningful changes. He'd taken to starting his days earlier, not because he had to, but because he wanted to get a head start, to approach his work with a new sense of mindfulness. The precinct still buzzed with the same energy, but now Jason moved through it with a calm purpose, trying to learn from his colleagues and build relationships he had once ignored. He found himself reaching out more, asking for advice, showing a genuine interest in others' experiences. He wasn't just trying to be the cop everyone respected. He was trying to be someone they could trust. It was harder than he had expected. There were moments of doubt, when the old arrogance crept in, or when he felt like he wasn't doing enough. But each time those thoughts came, he reminded himself that change wasn't immediate. It took time, and it took effort. One morning, Jason received a call from his supervisor, Officer Thomas. "Jason, we need you to handle a case today," Thomas said, his tone businesslike but not unkind. "It's a domestic dispute. Nothing too serious, but I need someone on it." Jason nodded, though Thomas couldn't see him. "Got it," he replied, his voice steady. He hung up and grabbed his things, walking out to his car with a renewed sense of purpose. The drive to the scene was quiet, and Jason couldn't help but think back to the days when he had taken his job for granted, when he had assumed that every call, every interaction, was just another part of the job. But today, it felt different. Today, he was ready to listen, to understand, and to help. When he arrived at the scene, he was met by a middle-aged woman named Linda, her face red and streaked with tears. Her husband, a man named Steve, stood a few paces behind her, arms crossed. "Officer Miller," Linda said, her voice shaky but firm. "I don't know what to do anymore." Jason nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a look of quiet understanding. "Let's talk about it," he said, his voice calm. As they spoke, Jason could see the tension between them, the hurt and frustration that had built up over the years. Steve didn't speak much, only occasionally offering a defensive grunt, but Linda's words poured out like a dam breaking. She was tired of being dismissed, tired of being ignored. Jason listened, really listened, taking in every word, every pause. He could feel the weight of her emotions, the pain she had been carrying. As the conversation continued, Jason found himself thinking not just about the case, but about his own past actions. He realized that what Linda needed most was not just the law, but someone who could listen, someone who could show empathy. He wasn't there to judge. He wasn't there to be the authority. He was there to help. When the conversation was over, Jason didn't offer empty promises or rush to solve the problem. Instead, he gave Linda the space to make her own decisions, letting her know that she wasn't alone, that there were options, and that he would be there if she needed him. As Jason drove away from the scene, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of fulfillment. It wasn't the kind of fulfillment that came from catching a criminal or making an arrest. It was the kind that came from doing something meaningful, from making a small difference in someone's life. He wasn't the same person who had walked into the precinct months ago. He wasn't the same person who had belittled Rachel or taken his power for granted. He was someone who had learned the value of empathy, of listening, and of taking responsibility. And though he knew the road ahead would still be difficult, Jason felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he had the strength to handle it with humility and respect. Weeks passed, and Jason's transformation was slow but steady. Each day he worked, he found new ways to improve himself, to listen more closely, and to truly understand the people around him. It wasn't just about his work anymore. It was about how he showed up in the world, how he treated others, and how he carried himself. His interactions with his colleagues became more genuine. He would ask about their families, offer a hand when someone needed help, and most importantly, he became a better listener. He wasn't just waiting for his turn to talk. He was present in the moment, fully engaged. He could tell that his change was starting to show. Officer Thomas, his supervisor, had noticed. One morning, as they reviewed some case files together, Thomas paused, looking at Jason thoughtfully. "I've been seeing a shift in you, Jason," he said, his voice neutral but not unkind. "You're different." In a good way. Jason felt a small flush of pride, but he kept his expression neutral. "I'm just trying to be better," he said, keeping his focus on the papers in front of him. Thomas nodded, as if that was exactly what he had expected. "Well, keep it up. We all make mistakes, but it's how we handle them that matters." Jason nodded, the words sinking in deeper than usual. He had learned that lesson already, but hearing it from Thomas made it feel more real. He wasn't just doing this for himself anymore. He was doing it for everyone around him. Later that afternoon, Jason was assigned to a routine traffic stop. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just another job, another day. But when he pulled over the vehicle and saw the driver, a young man in his early 20s, clearly nervous, Jason found himself approaching the situation with a different mindset. The young man stammered out an explanation, his hands shaking as he reached for his license and registration. Normally, Jason might have brushed it off, assuming it was just another nervous driver trying to cover something up. But today, something inside him clicked. Instead of rushing through the process, Jason took a deep breath and spoke calmly, his voice steady. "Take your time," he said. "I'm not here to make this harder than it needs to be." The young man looked up at him, a bit startled. For a moment, there was a hesitation, but then he relaxed, his grip loosening on the paperwork. "Thank you," he said quietly. Jason smiled slightly, nodding as he checked the information. Everything was in order, and he handed the papers back with a friendly, "You're good to go? Be safe out there." The young man gave him a quick nod, clearly relieved, before driving off. As Jason watched him go, he realized something profound. It wasn't about the ticket. It wasn't about the power he had as an officer. It was about how he made people feel. In that moment, he had chosen to make the encounter easier for someone, not harder. He wasn't just going through the motions. He was giving respect, and in return, he was getting it. The thought stuck with him the rest of the day. When he returned to the precinct, he found that his interactions with his colleagues had changed too. There was a new sense of camaraderie between them. They had started to see the change in him, and he could see it in them as well. They were beginning to open up, to trust him more. It was clear that they respected the effort he was putting in. As the day came to a close, Jason sat at his desk, the quiet hum of the precinct around him. For the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of peace. He knew he wasn't perfect, and he knew the road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but he also knew that he was on the right path. He had learned what it meant to be truly humble, to listen with intention, and to show respect to everyone he encountered. As Jason locked up and headed home, the weight of his past mistakes didn't seem as heavy. He was starting to make things right, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, he felt proud of who he was becoming. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, Jason found himself growing more comfortable in his new role. It was a gradual process, but one he was committed to. The precinct felt different now, not just because of his actions, but because the energy in the room had shifted. His colleagues noticed the change in him, and though they didn't always say it directly, Jason could tell that they respected the effort he was putting in. He wasn't just the officer with the badge anymore. He was the officer who listened, the officer who cared. And that made all the difference. One afternoon, Jason found himself on a routine patrol. The streets were quiet, the sun beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. It was the kind of peaceful evening that made Jason feel like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As he drove through the neighborhood, he noticed a group of teenagers hanging out near a corner. They weren't causing any trouble, just laughing and talking, but Jason instinctively slowed down as he passed. As he drove by, one of the teens, a young boy in a hoodie, caught his eye. The kid had a nervous look on his face, his hands stuffed in his pockets as he looked down at the ground. Jason's instinct kicked in, but instead of pulling over to confront him, he kept driving. It wasn't about catching someone doing something wrong. It was about understanding why the kid looked so nervous. A few minutes later, Jason parked his car a few blocks away and got out. He didn't want to intimidate the group, but he did want to make sure the kid wasn't in trouble. He approached the teen slowly, his hands in plain view, his body language open and non-threatening. "Hey," Jason said, his voice calm, his tone neutral. The group looked up, a mix of surprise and uncertainty in their eyes. The boy in the hoodie didn't look up, but Jason could feel the tension in the air. "How's everything going?" Jason asked, offering a smile. The group remained silent, and the boy with the hoodie shifted uncomfortably. Jason took a step back, giving them space. "Just wanted to check in," he said. "You all good?" The silence stretched on, and then, finally, the boy in the hoodie spoke up. "We're fine," he muttered, his voice low but steady. Jason nodded, acknowledging his response. "All right," he said, still smiling. "Just making sure." He paused for a moment before adding, "Stay safe out here. It's been a rough couple of weeks, you know?" The teens nodded in unison, and the boy in the hoodie lifted his head slightly, meeting Jason's gaze for the first time. There was a moment of understanding between them. Jason could see it in the kid's eyes. Fear, yes, but also a hint of gratitude. The boy didn't say anything more, but he didn't need to. Jason knew he had done the right thing. He hadn't been there to assert his authority or make a show of power. He had been there to make sure they knew that he wasn't a threat, that he was someone they could turn to if they needed help. Jason turned and walked back to his car, the encounter leaving him with a sense of quiet satisfaction. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just doing his job, but doing it in a way that made a real difference. When he got back into his car and drove away, he felt a calm that had been missing for so long. He wasn't the same person he had been when he started. He had learned the value of respect, of humility, and of understanding. And that was worth more than any badge or title. That night, as Jason sat at home, reflecting on his day, he realized how far he had come. He was no longer just an officer. He was someone who could make a difference, no matter how small the gesture. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.